Hello Bits and Bones. It's the end of January, so if I'm going to actually be doing this YouTube thing properly, I have to do a wrap-up. Well, nobody's forcing me to do a wrap-up, but that's kind of expected, I'd say. Over the month of January, I have read 9 books. I'm assuming I'm not going to finish the one I'm currently reading, which is The Graveyard Book, before the end of tonight. But you never know. And if you know The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, then you'll know that it's a graphic novel. Starting 2021, I have been reading a lot of graphic novels. I've only read 9 books, but technically I've read 3 memoirs, or memoir-ish poetry, prose-styled recountings of a life. One is a pure fiction story, while the other ones are nonfiction. 4 graphic novels. One of the memoirs is recounted through drawing, so that's why it's a bit of both. I've read 1 children's book just because I wanted to see the illustration. I'm trying to get more into visual stimulation. I want to figure out what I want to do for my own. Not children's book, just book. And 2 quite lengthy, for me anyway, novels, Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill and The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. I loved The Heart-Shaped Box, was very meh about The Immortalists. It was well written, but at the same time not very engaging or endearing. But the ones that I want to focus on and actually recap for January is the 4 graphic novels that I read. First, we're going to start with The Fire Never Goes Out by Noelle Stevenson. We're starting with that one because it is a bit more apart from the theme of the other 3, which will become apparent once I mention them. Although it is technically also related. So The Fire Never Goes Out is a personal memoir by Noelle Stevenson of her life and the events that have shaped her in coming out, the struggles that she faced with religious groups when she was young, or not struggles, but like her finding of what she believed in, and then also how she's had to deal with mental illness in one shape or form, and which it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger on that note. She says that she has found a better path in life, but will elaborate more on what the problems were, and I'm sure what we can relate to or should understand about her condition or how she's felt throughout her past in another memoir or novel, which I am excited to read. It was a very cute one. And the one thing that connects it to all the other graphic novels that I read is the theme of LGBTQ plus identity and struggles. The other books that I read, other than The Fire Never Goes Out, which is a personal memoir where she talks about the struggles of coming out and her conflicted feelings. I also read The Witch Boy, I read The Magic Fish, and I read The Prince and the Dressmaker. The Magic Fish is the story of a young immigrant boy dealing with the struggles of that while also trying to find his own sexual identity in a community that clearly doesn't quite accept it. And it also completely intertwines the theme of storytelling and how from where he came from to where we are, and how the fairy tales that we are aware of, or the fairy tales that we have been taught as children, have developed and grown over the time and places that they have been to suit the needs of the people that they are listening to them. So that was extremely layered once I started thinking about it afterwards, and it was a really great book. I gave it 5 stars. The Witch Boy is, you can probably guess what it's about. It's about a young boy who wants to be a witch, but all witches are girls, and boys are supposed to be, in this world, shapeshifters to protect the witches from monsters. It's basically determined you're one or the other, although he is inclined towards being a witch instead, and they repeatedly tell him, no, being a witch isn't for boys, just like pink isn't for boys and blue isn't for girls. So The Witch Boy dealt with the same sort of finding of gender identity, although it was a lot more obvious in what it was doing, and a lot more simple overall, you could say. It basically tells you in the title, it's the witch boy. He is something other than what he's supposed to be, as we define witches in our current society. And the last one I read was The Prince and the Dressmaker, which I absolutely loved in a different way than I loved The Magic Fish. The Magic Fish was more of it felt very non-fiction, even though it was a fiction story. It completely related to something that could happen in real life. It felt very realistic. It dealt with real world problems. But The Prince and the Dressmaker was just fantasy in a way. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's about a prince who likes to wear dresses, and he hires a dressmaker, and that's not entirely expected of him to be filling that role. He gets very involved in the fashion world, and then it's a big scandal to see if he will be exposed, what will happen if he is, and overall how society will adapt to that knowledge, as well as a very cute little love story on top. It had quite a few adult jokes that I wasn't quite expecting, so that was nice, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It made me laugh out loud, like that never happens when I'm reading, so I have to say that I really enjoyed it, and it got a 5 out of 5 too. Because I'm getting more into graphic novels and my library is slightly limited, if you have any that you'd like to recommend, I'd be really happy to hear it. As you can see from the reading material that I had this month, they were all related in some way to gender identity, acceptance, finding oneself in the LGBTQ plus realm. And that's not very surprising. I feel like graphic novels in general, although they are accepted and mainstream, they aren't as widely distributed. They take more effort to make. People don't read them. Like, people don't go out of the way to read them, just like they don't go out of their way to read anthologies of short stories over novels for the most part. So I think there's a lot less gatekeeping, there's a lot less whitewashing, and it's more of an open space for people to express themselves and to deal with those sorts of struggles, to communicate the issues that they're facing without a heavy amount of judgment, or like, oh, this book wasn't good because it didn't follow X plot, or it had this trope or that trope, whereas graphic novels are much more about the simplicity of it, what you can communicate without going way overboard. Convoluted plots and pictures that take literally days to draw. It has to be a lot more uniform, easy to understand, and easy to communicate. So as I said, I'm not surprised that graphic novels have, or the ones that I have access to, so it feels like a higher percentage of them deal with social issues in that realm. And honestly, it's really refreshing and I really enjoy it. I'm sure the Graveyard Book will not be the same thing at all. It'll be more comic book-esque, and I will get more into comic books and manga. But for the time being, this is more of a bit of a transition. Out of the 9 books that I read, 3 of them were in poetic prose, and 2 of them were memoirs, and one was a fiction story that felt like a memoir called Other Words for Home. And the one that I haven't mentioned yet was Ordinary Hazards by Nikki Grimes. I'm trying to keep a wider spectrum of reading if I can help it, where I've got the 2 big novels, the short memoir, poetry, prose, and then the graphic novels. If I can keep that going, that would be great. I think my library is going to run out eventually, and I'm not in the position to be buying books left, right, and center. As you can see by my bookshelf, I spend more money on plushies than books. Anyway, I'm not very good at doing wrap-ups yet. I'm not very well-spoken. I don't communicate things very well without a script, I guess. Maybe. Overall, out of the 9 books that I read, which I will show somewhere, I would highly recommend reading The Prince and the Dressmaker if you want a light-hearted read that's just like really cute, just so cute. And you can dig deeper into it if you want, but it's just a very enjoyable read. The Magic Fish for its underlying intertwined theme about the way stories shape us and are shaped themselves by us. Other Words for Home was very cute, although it is not nonfiction, which is what I thought when I went into it. I think that's perfectly fine. I think that the character that was written and the way that it was written was perfectly appropriate, but in the future I'll be much more wary of people writing about things that they didn't technically personally experience, and take that with a grain of salt. Other Words for Home is a poetry prose book about the story of a young immigrant girl and how she feels coming to America from Syria, all of the small struggles and whatnot, but it's mostly just from the child's perspective. So not only is it cute, it's also not overdone in the way some adults write children, if you know what I mean. And if you want to get a better understanding and empathy for people going through things that you haven't personally experienced, like immigration or racism, and in the case of some of the graphic novels that I read, homophobia, Other Words for Home is a good one because you're introduced to this world that you don't understand and technically should not have opinions on through the eyes of a young girl that also doesn't quite understand everything going on. So it gives you a good baseline and a starting point for relating and sympathizing. And of course, Heart-Shaped Box was just great. It was Joe Hill. It was the first Joe Hill that I read. I loved it. I'm going to read all of his other books. I think I'm going to go with a short story collection about weather. next if I can. But overall, I'm basically going to be just about as obsessed with him as I am with Gillian Flynn and Stephen King. Hopefully. So those are the things that I read in January. Thank you for watching. If you've read any of those yourself, let me know how you felt about them. If you have any recommendations based on what I said I liked, I would love to hear them, and I'll check and see if my library has them. For now, that's just my only access to literature. I hope in the next month to just keep the trend going. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.